Brutal news shakes Formula One. Lewis Hamilton immediately resigns from his contract with Ferrari to join Red Bull. Stay until the end to uncover the reasons behind this shocking move, which will go down in Formula One history as one of the greatest betrayals Ferrari has ever faced. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. It began with shadows, not statements. In the hushed corridors of exclusive hotels, in fleeting glances across paddock hospitality suites, in encrypted signals bouncing between satellites and burner phones no one would ever trace. Lewis Hamilton, the most decorated driver in the history of Formula One, a man who had shattered records, rewritten destiny, and carried the hopes of millions across decades, had grown increasingly unsettled. Beneath the polished facade, behind the PR-crafted smiles and team camaraderie, there was something fractured, something brewing, something inevitable. The Formula One world just didn't know it yet. When Christian Horner was suddenly, and quite spectacularly, ousted from Red Bull Racing amidst swirling accusations, long-simmering friction with Helmut Marko, and a shifting power dynamic inside the team that had dominated the hybrid era, it sent shockwaves through the paddock. Many speculated about succession plans, leadership voids, and internal politics. Few, if any, connected that tremor to Lewis Hamilton. Fewer still realized that in the vacuum of Horner's absence, a back-channel opportunity had emerged, an opening that Red Bull had never previously considered, and one Hamilton, once seemingly married to Ferrari's resurrection project, now saw as a way out. What had once been deemed inconceivable, the thought of Hamilton in Red Bull colors, potentially replacing Sergio Perez or even destabilizing the Verstappen equation, was morphing, week by week, into a credible scenario. Hamilton had gone to Ferrari with nothing short of a dream. Not a contract, not a payday, not a retirement plan, a dream. A dream of channeling the legacy of Michael Schumacher, of leading the Scarlet Red Machine back to championship glory, of conquering not just tracks, but history itself. He envisioned roaring Tifosi at Monza singing his name, of title-clinching drives in rain-soaked Spa afternoons, of standing on the top step at Suzuka in crimson overalls with a prancing horse on his chest. It was never about adding another trophy to the cabinet, it was about transcendence. And at first, he believed. But from the outset, the signs were not right. Subtle cues emerged. They weren't mistakes, not on paper. But they weren't coincidental either. A new front wing for Charles Leclerc, the prodigy Ferrari had raised, the Monégasque poster boy, their chosen son. Then a floor upgrade. Then a re-profiled suspension arm. Always arriving just a race or two earlier for Leclerc than for Hamilton. And when the upgrades did reach both cars, Hamilton found that they somehow aligned better with Leclerc's aggressive driving profile. They promoted sharper turn-in, encouraged rotation at corner entry, traits Leclerc thrived on. For Hamilton, who operated on fluidity, on managing tire life with ballet-like precision, the setups felt twitchy, even compromised. At first, he gave the team the benefit of the doubt. Quiet inquiries during technical debriefs. Subtle comments about balance, about corner phase, about setup neutrality. Engineers smiled. They acknowledged. Promises were made. But nothing shifted. Race after race, Charles looked increasingly comfortable. In FP2S and qualifying, he was always just that tenth ahead. And Hamilton? He began to fall into the shadows of his own ambition. He remained composed publicly, no fireworks, no quotes to ignite headlines. But in the footage, in every paddock walk, every Sky Sports post-session chat, his expressions told a deeper truth. A war was brewing, and the battlefield was within Maranello's own walls. Behind closed doors, Hamilton's concerns began turning into frustrations. He wasn't simply asking for preferential treatment. He was demanding parity, equal opportunity, equal machinery, equal input. But the more he pushed, the more he saw walls rising around him. His feedback during simulator runs was sometimes dismissed as non-representative. His preferences for mechanical grip or damper profiles were quietly deprioritized. Meanwhile, the telemetry sheets from Leclerc's car were often used as the new gold standard, the benchmark the entire engineering team pivoted toward. Even his race engineers began suggesting that he experiment with Charles's settings. That wasn't collaboration. That was assimilation. The media, ever watchful, began to speculate. Whispers on Italian talk shows. Tweets from journalists embedded inside Ferrari. Headlines began to appear. Is Ferrari still Charles Leclerc's team? Hamilton playing catch-up? Silent rift at Maranello? Hamilton kept his responses sharp, diplomatic, unrevealing. But when asked about development direction or his influence within the team, his answers grew shorter, colder, more detached. Something had changed, and those closest to him knew it. Then came the tipping point. Barcelona. A track Hamilton knew like the back of his hand. In practice, he had found a groove. The car was finally speaking his language. He topped FP1 and looked set to challenge for pole. But Saturday morning, without clear warning, the team reverted to an older spec rear suspension due to data inconsistencies. The same spec that Leclerc had used all weekend. Hamilton's pace evaporated. He qualified P8. Post-session, he didn't explode. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. Back in his hotel that night, Hamilton placed a call. Not to Toto Wolff. Not to an old friend. But to a number connected to Red Bull's new leadership structure. A call that began with vague pleasantries and ended with something that changed the course of the season. Because Red Bull wasn't the same team anymore. Max Verstappen still reigned supreme, but he wasn't untouchable. Christian Horner's exit had exposed cracks. Pierre Wache, now with expanded influence, had long admired Hamilton's feedback loop. The new management, more corporate, less tribal, saw value in Hamilton's brand, in his experience, in the drama he would bring. And Hamilton? He didn't just want a fast car. He wanted leverage. He wanted narrative control. And for the first time in years, Red Bull seemed ready to offer it. Ferrari, meanwhile, remained oblivious, or perhaps willfully ignorant. They had assumed Hamilton would see out his contract, that prestige and pride would keep him loyal. But the paddock started buzzing again. Red Bull Junior drivers spotted dining near Hamilton's entourage. Mechanics from both garages seen laughing together at private venues. And most critically, whispers that Red Bull had already blocked future upgrade paths that would conflict with Hamilton's input, even before a formal deal had been signed. The drama was escalating. Leclerc, though not vocal, began to show signs of discomfort. His race engineer once let slip a radio message that referred to Lewis's dissatisfaction in the middle of a Q2 push lap. A Freudian slip? A sign of internal meetings spilling into operational language? Either way, it lit a fire across social media. Now, with the second half of the season looming, and with every Grand Prix turning into an audition, the sport stands on the edge of its next great chapter. The seven-time champion is no longer content with nostalgia. He is no longer chasing legacy. He is chasing justice, equality, and revenge. Because if Hamilton does jump to Red Bull, a team that once mocked his era, once called him overrated, once existed as his foil, it won't just be about winning again. It will be about dismantling everything Ferrari stood for. It will be about proving that no matter how deep the roots of favoritism grow, no matter how many engineers bow to the chosen one, no matter how many times he's doubted, Lewis Hamilton still decides his fate. And the paddock? It's watching, holding its breath. Because the king is not done. And when he makes his move, Formula may first never be the same again. Behind closed doors, in the corridors of Maranello and the hidden rooms where real decisions are made, Charles Leclerc was no longer simply one of Ferrari's two drivers. He had quietly, yet unmistakably, ascended to a role far more symbolic, far more protected. He was the project, the future, the cornerstone, the one around whom the entire post-Vettel, post-Raikkonen era would be built. While official team statements repeated the mantra of equal treatment and team-first philosophy, the reality behind the scenes told an entirely different story, one that Lewis Hamilton began to see more clearly with every passing Grand Prix. It started subtly. A minor scheduling shift here, a missed opportunity there. Simulator access, that critical tool for understanding upcoming upgrades, was becoming increasingly exclusive. Leclerc was granted long private sessions in Ferrari's state-of-the-art facility, often scheduled in the dead of night or early morning to avoid media scrutiny. These weren't mere preparation runs. They were deep, granular engineering sessions with top-level aerodynamicists and strategists present, analyzing every corner of upcoming circuits and adapting setups precisely to Charles's feedback. When Hamilton inquired about similar simulator time, especially ahead of major upgrade weekends where new aerodynamic packages, floor specs, or suspension tweaks were due to debut, he was met with administrative smokescreens. "We're still finalizing your schedule," they told him. Or, "There's a bottleneck with the technical staff this week, but we'll try to accommodate next time." Sometimes the excuse was travel delays. Other times it was unexpected overlap with Leclerc's sessions. The pattern was obvious to anyone who had seen the inner workings of a Formula One team before. And Lewis, a 7-time world champion with decades of political and competitive experience under his belt, recognized the writing on the wall. He also felt it during engineering meetings. Every time he voiced feedback, be it about traction issues in Sector 3 or rear stability under braking, the atmosphere would shift. Engineers nodded politely, jotted down a few notes, but the sense of urgency wasn't there. The energy was muted. The conversation often changed course quickly. In contrast, when Leclerc spoke, sometimes suggesting things Hamilton had brought up races earlier, there was animation in the room. Data screens lit up. Engineers leaned in. The lead performance analyst once stayed behind an extra hour after a Leclerc debrief, something he never did after Hamilton's. And then came Monaco, the catalyst that transformed silent suspicion into open frustration. For Lewis, Monaco had always been sacred ground. It was where raw talent trumped machinery. A place where margins were microscopic and every mistake was amplified. He arrived in Monte Carlo that weekend determined to remind everyone of who he was, not just a legendary driver, but the benchmark of his generation. He had spent hours in his own simulator, refining his approach, taking notes on throttle application, camber differences, and tire degradation on the resurfaced circuit. But something was off even before free practice 1. He noticed that Leclerc's garage was a hive of activity, unusually so. Extra personnel. Whispered conversations. Covered parts being wheeled in under security escort. Hamilton asked his race engineer what was happening. The response was vague, minor setup adjustments. Standard procedure. But it wasn't standard. Not at Ferrari. Not that week. By qualifying, the truth emerged. Leclerc was running the new floor spec. A subtle yet crucial aerodynamic evolution that dramatically improved rear-end downforce and stability through tight corners. Precisely the kind of edge you want in Monaco. Hamilton had heard of this upgrade in previous briefings. He had been told it would be ready in time for the race weekend. Yet now, just hours before the most important quali session of the season, he was informed, "Your package is being held for Barcelona. Manufacturing delays." He didn't believe it for a second. Still, he climbed into the car and delivered a lap that defied logic, pushing every inch of the car to its absolute limit. When he crossed the line, he knew it was special. Not perfect, but close. Yet when the timing screens updated, he was P5. Leclerc was on pole. And not by a fraction, by several tenths. The paddock buzzed with applause for Leclerc. The tifosi rejoiced. The commentators praised the young Monégasque's precision and confidence. But Hamilton, watching the replays, listening to the tone in his engineer's voice, knew exactly what had happened. It wasn't just about performance anymore. It was about priority. The debrief was tense. Silent. Frosted with unspoken truths. Hamilton sat, arms folded, absorbing the data being presented, knowing full well what the graphs wouldn't show, that he had been handicapped. Politely. Strategically. Intentionally. Eventually, he broke the silence. Calm, but razor-sharp. "I can't compete with one hand tied behind my back." The room froze. Not a single engineer dared to reply. Some shifted in their seats. Others stared blankly at their laptops. A few avoided eye contact altogether. It wasn't just the sentence. It was the weight behind it. The accumulated frustration of months. The realization that the team, for all its public unity, had made its choice. And Hamilton? He wasn't going to sit quietly in the shadow of that choice any longer. Late into a humid summer evening in Barcelona, beneath the glowing city lights and the echo of a race weekend that had once again left him hollow, Lewis Hamilton sat alone in his hotel suite, staring out at the skyline with a mind ablaze with frustration, strategy, and something else he hadn't felt in a long time: resolve. The Grand Prix had ended hours ago, but the sting of another uninspired seventh-place finish burned deep. It wasn't the result itself. Hamilton had long since stopped measuring his worth by finishing positions. It was the pattern. The repeated déjà vu of watching Charles Leclerc get the tire strategy he had asked for. The earlier pit window. The undercut. The fresher compound. The team radio filled with veiled justifications. The cold silence in post-race debriefs. The way the garage seemed tilted, not physically, but emotionally, toward the Monégasque. And Barcelona was the final straw. As the sun set behind Montjuic, he picked up his phone. No hesitation. No second guessing. He wasn't calling Toto. He wasn't messaging Fred Vasseur. He wasn't reaching out to anyone who'd smile and nod and tell him patience was a virtue. Instead, he instructed his personal manager, through a short encrypted message, to initiate quiet contact with the only team on the grid whose internal foundations were shifting fast enough to allow something truly radical: Red Bull Racing. But this wasn't a conversation meant for Christian Horner. Horner, the face of Red Bull for over a decade, was no longer the kingmaker. In his place stood a new triumvirate. Helmut Marko, the silent orchestrator of Red Bull's ruthless driver development history. Oliver Mintzlaff, the corporate mind brought in to balance sport and brand. And a wider board hungry to reclaim their image in the wake of scandal, exits, and the growing unease around the very identity of Red Bull post-Horner. The timing was exquisite. What unfolded over the following 37 days was one of the most covert and consequential negotiation periods in the modern history of Formula One. There were no agents in suits sitting in the paddock. No private jets photographed idling at obscure Austrian airports. No text leaks to the media. Just encrypted calls, VPN masked emails, and off-season simulator sessions booked under pseudonyms. Red Bull had been thrown into turmoil following Horner's scandal and subsequent departure. And while the world speculated on Verstappen's future, whispering about his father Jos's growing influence, about clandestine meetings with Audi's upper brass, about late-night dinners in Stuttgart with Mercedes, Red Bull's core quietly began preparing for a world where Max might leave. Or worse, stay but without loyalty. And in that delicate moment, Hamilton's interest wasn't a desperate plea to return to a top car. It was a power play. Red Bull didn't just see the commercial upside of a 7-time world champion donning the blue and red, they saw the geopolitical brilliance of it. Luring Hamilton would be an act of war. Against Mercedes. Against Ferrari. Against Max. Against everything that defined the old era. Every detail was meticulously debated. Hamilton, sharp as ever, refused to be treated like a legacy signing or a second driver. He demanded and received written assurances of full technical transparency, equal car development rights, and an ironclad clause prohibiting preferential treatment toward any teammate, current or future. He wanted access to the simulator in Milton Keynes at the same level as the lead development driver. He asked to be involved in the Aero roadmap discussions with Adrian Newey's successor team. He even demanded integration with Red Bull Advanced Technologies to align both car and driver feedback with future car architecture. But more importantly, Hamilton made one thing abundantly clear: he would not relive 2024. He would not sit in a garage where the whispers favored the younger driver, where strategies were accidentally skewed, where the debriefs became polite evasions. Red Bull's leadership understood. In fact, they welcomed it. Behind closed doors, the dynamics at Red Bull had already begun to shift. Verstappen's relationship with the team was no longer sacred. The Horner scandal had fractured old loyalties, and the Verstappen camp, increasingly emboldened by their leverage, had started to clash with Mintzlaff's more corporate, less sentimental leadership style. Verstappen Sr. was rumored to be pushing for a clause that would allow Max to walk away if key personnel, like technical director Pierre Watch or performance engineer Tom Hart, were replaced. The environment was combustible. And into that vacuum, Hamilton didn't just step, he surged. Red Bull wasn't just willing to accept Hamilton. They were prepared to build around him. For the first time in years, Hamilton would be offered not just equal status, but the opportunity to become the philosophical and strategic center of a team again. No more adapting to younger talents. No more walking on eggshells. No more legacy driver labels. He was to be the axis around which Red Bull's future would spin. In one internal document circulated among Red Bull's board, a simple but powerful phrase had been underlined: Lewis Hamilton isn't just a signing. He's a statement. A statement that Red Bull was still the most aggressive player in the game. That they weren't afraid of rewriting history. That they could pivot from the Verstappen dynasty into a new era without skipping a beat. And perhaps most provocatively, that they could weaponize Hamilton's hunger for vindication as the ultimate tool of resurgence. Hamilton's camp was methodical. They asked for performance clauses tied not only to podiums but also internal parity metrics, data access, upgrade frequency, tire allocation equity. They discussed the possibility of Hamilton appearing in Red Bull's global brand campaigns, not just as a driver, but as a lifestyle icon, something Mercedes had failed to fully capitalize on. Red Bull, ever the marketing titan, salivated at the thought. The silence was deafening. Not a word leaked. Not a whisper from Ferrari. Not even a suspicion from Mercedes. And yet, by the end of the 37-day stretch, the framework was there. An agreement in principle. A strategic alignment that would send shockwaves through the paddock once revealed. And above all, a new path for Hamilton, one that wasn't about retirement, nostalgia, or curtain calls. It was about war. A war for relevance. For control. For legacy. And Hamilton, ever the tactician, ever the chess player in a world of checkers, had found the board on which to make his next, most daring move. The internal direction of the car's design underwent a seismic shift the moment discussions began behind closed doors. Red Bull Racing, long known for its uncompromising development style spearheaded by Adrian Newey and honed around Max Verstappen's aggressive, pointy driving approach, made a stunning departure from its traditional philosophy. While at Ferrari, Lewis Hamilton had often played second fiddle to Charles Leclerc when it came to engineering direction, with the Monégasque's feedback taking precedence and shaping the car's aerodynamics to match his preferences. Red Bull presented an entirely different proposition. Here, Hamilton was no longer being asked to adapt. He was being asked to lead. This wasn't just a contract signing, it was a complete restructuring of power within the design office. Hamilton would be more than a driver, he'd be a collaborator, an architect. Red Bull offered him something that had eluded him since the early Mercedes years: influence. Real influence. Lewis wasn't just stepping into the cockpit, he was stepping into the command room. Enrico Balba, one of the top aerodynamicists in Milton Keynes, was quietly reassigned with a new priority directive from the highest levels of Red Bull's leadership: ensure that the 2026 concept car, with all the upcoming regulation changes and power unit transitions, would be sculpted around Hamilton's input. His demand for a smoother, more responsive platform wasn't merely acknowledged, it became doctrine. Mid-corner traction, stability under braking, a more progressive rear, all became focal points of the new development model. Internally, it was codenamed Project 7. Not for its sequence, but for what it symbolized: Hamilton's hunt for his elusive 8th world title. The team didn't talk openly about it, not even within Red Bull Racing's inner circles. It was need to know. And for months, almost no one knew. Then came July 30th, 2025, a day that will be studied for years by F1 historians. In absolute secrecy, inside a nondescript conference room on the top floor of a private Zurich hotel, the deal was inked. There were no agents. No PR teams. Just Lewis, Helmut Marko, and Christian Horner. The paperwork was signed under maximum discretion. There were no digital copies. No signatures exchanged via email. It was analog, handwritten, old school, just as Hamilton preferred it when trust, not technology, was the only shield. The silence was absolute. For 48 hours, the F1 paddock remained oblivious. No insiders leaked it. No cryptic posts. Not even a whisper. But on August 1st, the dam broke. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't speculation. It was a thunderclap. Lewis Hamilton signs with Red Bull for 2026. 3 seconds after the headline dropped, the racing world fractured. Ferrari loyalists were shell-shocked. Some fans burned jerseys live on Instagram. Italian tabloids called it an atto di tradimento sportivo, an act of sporting betrayal. The tifosi felt abandoned. After all, they had welcomed Hamilton like a messiah only 2 years earlier. They thought he would bring Ferrari back to glory, that he would be their savior. Instead, he was gone, just as suddenly as he arrived. Red Bull supporters didn't know what to think. Half were ecstatic, already designing new Hamilton-themed liveries and avatars for their social media profiles. The other half, particularly the Verstappen diehards, were thrown into an identity crisis. Would Red Bull now be Hamilton's team? What did this mean for Max? Would there be civil war within the camp? Could their two champions even coexist under the same roof, or would one be sacrificed? And then there were the Hamilton fans, those who had stuck with him through the post-2021 chaos, the bruising Mercedes slump, the heartbreaks in red. To them, this was resurrection. This was vindication. They hadn't seen their driver in a truly competitive car since Abu Dhabi 2021, and now finally, the king was back. But not with nostalgia. Not with longing. He returned with fury. With purpose. With teeth bared. Social media platforms collapsed under the weight of opinion. GOAT TORBR. Trended worldwide within 12 minutes. Sky Sports and F1 TV interrupted their regular programming. Mercedes remained silent. Ferrari issued a generic one-line statement. We thank Lewis Hamilton for his professionalism and contributions. No further comments. Silence, yes, but everyone could feel the tension. And Max Verstappen? Not a word. Not a tweet. Just a cryptic post on Instagram, a black square, captioned only with a stopwatch emoji. But deep inside Red Bull's headquarters, the mood was laser-focused. Christian Horner had bet everything on this move. Not just financially, but politically. There had been resistance from within. Senior engineers loyal to Max had raised concerns. But Horner pushed through. Why? Because he saw something no one else did. The potential of combining the most dominant team of the hybrid era with the most experienced, strategic, and relentless driver of the modern era. It wasn't about appeasement. It was about domination. Hamilton was already scheduled to begin simulator work as early as November. Not for publicity, but to begin molding the RB20X, the first true hybrid of two legends. Gone were the days of just fighting for podiums. Now, Lewis was building his legacy with tools sharp enough to carve his name into history once more. This was more than a contract. It was a declaration. A final chapter. A rebirth. A power move that sent shockwaves through every garage in the paddock. From Maranello to Woking, from Brackley to Faenza, teams were scrambling. If Red Bull and Hamilton were united, 2026 wasn't just going to be competitive. It was going to be war. And as for Hamilton? He didn't say much publicly. Just one line at the end of the press release. I'm not done yet. The message was clear. The fire hadn't dimmed. The throne was still in sight. And the king was coming for it, one final time, with Red Bull blood in his veins and vengeance in his soul. The moment the news broke, Maranello fell into a state of uncontrollable turmoil. The inner corridors of Ferrari, once filled with pride, passion, and unwavering ambition, were now consumed by disbelief, fury, and a kind of emotional paralysis that no one had anticipated. According to multiple sources from inside the Scuderia, team principal Frédéric Vasseur was blindsided, completely unprepared for the magnitude of what had just transpired. His reaction was immediate and desperate. He summoned an emergency meeting, pulling in senior engineers, PR personnel, strategy chiefs, and even Ferrari board members in a frantic attempt to regain control of a situation that was already spiraling into chaos. No one had seen it coming. Or rather, they had seen the warning signs, but arrogantly dismissed them, believing that a seven-time world champion would never walk away mid-project. Especially not like this. Especially not to them. Charles Leclerc, Ferrari's poster boy and longtime golden child, refused to comment publicly. He declined interviews, ignored press briefings, and was reportedly seen leaving the factory with his head down, avoiding eye contact with even his most trusted mechanics. Behind the scenes, insiders describe a man caught between disbelief and silent fury. He had looked up to Hamilton. He had respected him. But deep down, he likely knew this was no sudden decision. This was something that had been building, something that had been allowed to build, for months if not years. The silent tension between Hamilton and Ferrari management, the quiet disagreements over race strategy, the overlooked feedback during debriefs, the subtle sidelining in team branding and media narratives, it had all added up. And now, it had exploded into the ultimate humiliation. Inside the Scuderia, morale is reportedly at its lowest in over a decade. Not since the days of internal politics post-Schumacher era has the team felt so directionless, so wounded. It's not merely that they lost a champion, it's that they drove him away. Worse still, they drove him directly into the arms of the very enemy they had sworn to dethrone, Red Bull Racing. And if that wasn't already a bitter enough pill to swallow, the timing makes it infinitely more painful. 2026 marks the beginning of a new regulation era, a clean slate, a turning point. Ferrari had invested everything, money, time, personnel, into preparing for a fresh start. And now, their most experienced driver, their potential ace in this new phase, has decided he no longer believes in their project. Instead, he's joined forces with Christian Horner, Helmut Marko, and Adrian Newey in what can only be described as a seismic shift in the sport's power dynamics. Those close to Hamilton have since painted a picture that is deeply personal, far beyond points, podiums, or contracts. This wasn't just a calculated career move. This was an emotional declaration. A response to years of perceived disrespect. A decision born from a lack of recognition. At Ferrari, he had hoped to end his career not only with victory but with dignity, reverence, and perhaps even mythic status. He wanted to wear the red suit, lift the Scudetto into the sky, and etch his name alongside the likes of Lauda and Schumacher in Maranello's sacred legacy. Instead, he found himself quietly sidelined, often left out of key decisions, and increasingly portrayed as a mere supporting actor in Leclerc's story. Ferrari, perhaps unintentionally, treated him like a guest, not like family. And so, Lewis Hamilton did what few ever imagined. He walked away. Not just from a team, but from an entire dream. And in doing so, he handed Ferrari their most devastating loss since Alonso's exit in 2014, only this time, amplified 100-fold. But where one story ends, another begins. And what awaits Formula One fans in 2026 promises to be nothing short of cinematic. Hamilton in Red Bull colors, the very livery he once battled against with ferocity and defiance, now becomes his armor. The hunter becomes the hunted, the antagonist becomes the ally. The paddock can barely process what's coming. Every press conference, every qualifying session, every wheel-to-wheel encounter will now carry the weight of narrative, history, and psychological warfare. And as the dust begins to settle, questions emerge like wildfire. Will Verstappen accept this alliance? Will Red Bull's seemingly impenetrable structure adapt to accommodate another alpha? Will two titans, both used to domination, truly share the same garage in harmony? Or is this simply a fuse waiting to ignite a new civil war inside Milton Keynes? Already, whispers suggest Verstappen wasn't informed until the very last minute. That he feels blindsided, even betrayed. That this move, while promising on paper, could mark the beginning of unprecedented internal friction within Red Bull. Christian Horner, master of paddock diplomacy, insists that this is a new era of collaboration and mutual respect, but even he knows the risks involved. The stakes have never been higher. Two of the sport's most dominant forces now sit on the same throne. And thrones, as history has taught us, are rarely shared peacefully. What cannot be denied is that Hamilton's journey is far from over. If anything, it's just entering its most compelling chapter. At 41, he's not slowing down. He's gearing up for war. This isn't about proving others wrong anymore. This is about cementing something unshakable. Legacy. Immortality. The kind that echoes through generations. The kind that transcends championships and statistics. If he wins even once in Red Bull Blue, it'll be history. If he wins a title, it'll be legend. If he takes down Ferrari and outperforms Verstappen in the process, it'll be the single greatest redemption arc motorsport has ever seen. He came to Ferrari seeking glory in red, hoping to end his career as a knight in scarlet armor. But Ferrari offered him a cage, not a crown. Now in blue, under the Red Bull banner, Hamilton isn't just racing. He's writing a final act so audacious, so poetic, that it threatens to redefine what greatness looks like in Formula One. Every turn of the wheel from this moment forward won't just be a lap, it'll be a message. A statement. A war cry. He didn't leave Ferrari out of fear. He left out of conviction. He didn't abandon a team. He liberated himself from a narrative that no longer served him. And now, armed with a new car, a new purpose, and perhaps the last great opportunity of his career, Lewis Hamilton isn't chasing points. He's chasing something far more rare. He's chasing forever.